Welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Darin Lundberg.
And I'm Johnny Craddock.
And today we'll be talking about Dog Day Afternoon, directed by Sidney Lumet. Want to make sure we got that right this time instead of mispronouncing like we did with our Death Trap episode. Starring Al Pacino and John Cazale. Charles Durning is in there, Lance Henriksen, and Carol Kane. So an all-star, soon-to-be all-star cast. But anyway, so Johnny, we wanted to welcome our next special guest. You know him from Real Spoilers. You also know him as a film critic for The Carney Show on KTRS. St. Louis, right, Tom? Is that where you're
Correct.
located?
That is where we are located.
Mr. Tom O'Keefe, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Well, we've been talking off air. Like, Real Spoilers is, man, you guys are monsters. Like, you just hit episode 796.
Yes.
And you covered Unfrosted, the Jerry Seinfeld Pop-Tarts movie of all things. Or as you started to call it, Unfunny. I think that's what you're going to try to
it was because I always get the title wrong. It's just a silly running joke. But and honestly, like, I was just being kind of a D-bag about it because like, I didn't hate it. Like, I know it's become an internet punching bag, but I was just like, it's fine. It's not amazing, but like, I mean, I was reasonably entertained for what it was. But I think it's just a weird thing to, like, we've seen these parody movies now for so long, like ever since Airplane, I guess, is probably the first, like, really, like, thematically, parody film. And you're just kind of running out of things. And so, like, Pop-Tarts. Right. And I know it's really ultimately kind of making fun of all the movies we've had that for some reason are turning products into heroes, like the Air Jordan movie and there's a Tetris movie, and it's kind of weird the way people can fetishize a product in that way.
Yeah.
But so I also get that it's poking fun at that. So it's just saying it's about Pop-Tarts I think is a little dismissive, but I also think that's not a genre of film that has been, like, as fully explored as,
what, the Pop-Tart genre?
Or movies about products. About products, is, like, by the time Airplane came out, you'd had, 4 airport movies, so and a lot of other disaster movies like Tower and Inferno and things like that. So but yeah, it's fine. It's not as bad as people are making. I've seen a lot worse movies.
I did try to
Drive
watch
Away
it,
Dolls.
but I fell asleep.
Yeah, and I get that. Like, I'm not sticking up for it either, and, like, saying, like, oh, you don't understand its genius. It's just, but
it's basically just Seinfeld's take on that genre.
Yeah.
Like, B Movie was his take on the DreamWorks movie. So,
right, exactly.
But that's the thing with Real Spoilers. And again, you co-host that with Kevin Brackett, who we had on for our Ninja Turtles episode, and it's a running gag that he invited himself on to that episode. But
that sounds like
him on. And then it's Joe Batiste, who's also a co-host, and then you just included you added Matt F. Blazer on. Is that correct?
Basler. And he's in and out, like, like, he's, I wouldn't call him like a full cast member, but he's on the Patreon a lot, and he is certainly a frequent guest and friend of the show.
Basler's great. Like, his conversation, like, is otherworldly, like his
his topic. He's a character.
So being a part of that, and Real Spoilers, again, almost 800 episodes. That's huge. When we had Kevin on, you guys had just hit 700. So again, we
were babies.
Amazing. Yeah. Not quite full grown adults, right?
Yeah.
And Johnny and I just hitting 100. That's kind of mind blowing to us. But, like,
hey, 100 is a ton. Like, don't undersell 100. Like, that's no mean feat. I mean, most podcasts, don't make it to their 5th episode.
Right.
So to hit 100 is truly an accomplishment.
Okay, well, we appreciate that, and again, we're aiming for 800, so hopefully we'll be alive by then. But if you could just give us a rundown, not just of Real Spoilers, but of you, Tom. Again, we want to be sure that everybody, like I said, you guys are monsters, but to get more people onto your side, like, what is it with Real Spoilers that you pride, and how did you put it together, and just give us a rundown of the show and of you. Let us know about you.
Sure. So I knew Kevin just casually from doing film reviews. At the time I was writing them, and we were talking at a movie screening one time, and honestly, I barely knew him, and I was telling him how like I always want to start a podcast, but it's just I really didn't really fully grasp the technical end of things. I'd been in radio, but like there's engineers for all that. You don't have to set up your own mic, right? And he was like, oh, like I wanted to do something like that too. And he's like, I know how to do all that stuff. And so, I was telling him that like I really wanted to do like a movie review show, but like I felt really constrained by the written reviews in that you couldn't give away certain aspects of films, right? I mean, that's not fair to people, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, I would really like to do a show where we talk about the films in depth, but we just let people know up front, like, look, man, like you need to have seen this movie or not care about having seen this movie if you want to listen, because we're gonna spoil everything about a movie if and so I was like, let's just own it up front, because even when you're reading a review and it's like, hey, this next paragraph's gonna have a spoiler, like your eye, even if you don't want to, it drifts down and you're like, well, son of a. And so I was like, let's just own it up front and we can talk about however we want. And then of course we're very chatty. And so we do tend to sometimes not talk about the movie hardly at all.
How do you know which movie you're going to talk about? How do you pick the movies?
We're typically trying to pick the whatever the biggest movie of the week is probably going to be. So like it's designed to be mass appeal. I know on the Unfrosted one the guest was giving us trouble because I mentioned that like, well, we've never done a documentary, and he's a documentary filmmaker, and so he was aghast. And it was just like, but most documentaries that one, they have a slow rollout. Most don't open wide like on the same day, like a Fast and Furious or a Marvel movie. And so like it's just not something that we've ever really thought to do, even though Kevin and I, like we do watch and enjoy documentaries. We just don't typically do them on the show. Also, like documentaries are always, not always, but frequently they're about something political, and like if you listen to the show, like you can probably figure out where we stand on the issues, but we also try not to just turn it into just us pontificating about politics.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because again, that's one of my, when you want to talk about a movie, like if you want to talk Fight Club, right? The way that the twist ties in with the themes, it's your hands are kind of tied, because it's like, well, I can't talk about that, but that's the whole point. That really, so just a lot of times when you read reviews, they're just like recapping the plot or who's in it, and I'm like, I can look this up on IMDb, really. I don't need this. Like, why are you being paid to do this? So I love that. Like, but I get it. It's like you don't want to spoil things right out of the gate. Like I've noticed on Twitter just in the past couple of days, there's one account that spoiled like big twist in The Vanishing, the '88 movie, and also in Diabolique. And I'm like, no, don't. I get that they're old movies, but it's like, you don't want to spoil the actual fun stuff. It's like, don't do that. I mean, it's hard. You know what I mean? It's hard to balance that. You want to talk about those things, but you don't want to give away the fun. So
and I would think in movies like that, like obviously those are older movies, but they're not necessarily like super huge movies in the same way that like if you spoil that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father, right? Like that's so part of the public zeitgeist. Like you're not really ruining that for anyone who's over the age of 9, right? And so, but like, like there's a lot of people out there who haven't watched those movies yet that maybe want to, and like, you probably should do a little bit more dancing around the reveals.
I mean, you know what I mean? It's hard to do that, but I like that you guys are upfront, and there are there are people that can go out and watch a movie like every night, or the new movie, that so they can sit down with your show and then go through that, and that's fun. You know what I mean? So I absolutely get that. But like with you too, like how did you get addicted to movie? Like we've got you and you're picking up and started real spoilers, but how did you get to be a movie lover? If you wanted to tell us a little bit about yourself personally.
So I think how I fell in love with movies is I was just the exact right age, and that, so I'm 53. I was born in 1970. I'll save you the trouble of doing math. And
well, you don't look a day over 52. So
well, I try. I moisturize nightly. And so my parents owned a printing company that was like in a little strip mall, and a video rental place opened up in the strip mall. And I had just talked my parents into buying me a VCR. So it's like 1980. We're talking like 1982, I guess.
Okay.
So like getting a VCR in 1982, that's no easy feat, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, and nobody ever talks about the upside of divorce, right? They felt really guilty, and their kid wanted a VCR, so they bought me a VCR. It was $1,000.
Yeah, I was just gonna say. Yeah.
Yeah, and $1,982. I'm not adjusting for inflation. And it was one of those ones that came in two pieces.
Yeah.
And it was a top loader. Top loaders were the way to go. Those were the best VCRs. And what was great about it is because it was in two pieces, you could unhook the one piece, you could take it with you, and it would work as a video player, as a VCP.
Yeah.
And so like I could go to a friend's house and hook it up to their TV and watch, because I was like the only kid with a VCR. And so, but this video place opened up in the strip mall, and my parents were doing their printing, and so they let me sign up for a membership. I think I've told this story on Real Spoilers. I am not making this up. My membership number was 7. Like that. And so and then I figured out, because it was so new, it was mom and pop. There was no Blockbuster Video yet. I think
on
the
cusp.
precursor to
Yeah.
The precursor to Blockbuster, I think, was Movies to Go, and like that's what got acquired by Blockbuster. And then, but that didn't exist yet. There was only mom and pop shops, and so I figured out that like nobody. It was so new. Nobody had given any thought to, what if a kid wants to rent an R-rated movie? And so I realized that they weren't stopping me from renting R-rated movies. And so I really wanted to see MASH. I was on a MASH kick. I loved the TV show MASH. I had read all the books. There's like 14 MASH books, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And only the first one is good, but I read them all anyway. But I'd never seen the movie, right? And so I rented the movie and then realized, like, oh, they let me rent a rated R movie. And then I just started renting all these movies that I had never been able to see because they were rated R.
Yeah.
And so like it was funny, like they were probably paying no attention, but in my kid mind, I was like, well, okay, they're gonna let me rent rated R movies, but I can't rent anything that is like obviously raunchy, right? Like, so like don't go in and like ruin the deal by trying to rent like Porky's, right? Like they're gonna catch on if you rent like something really like what I felt was
Party
really
Massacre.
yeah, exactly. So I'm like, but I can rent MASH, and I can rent, like, so I just started going down this rabbit hole. And then like I think at some point I just bought a book, like one of those like Insight Litter Malton books about movies. And so I just kind of started going down this rabbit hole of all these different movies that either I had heard of, or Serpico led me to Dog Day Afternoon, which leads me to whatever, and I just kind of and I just fell in love. I just saw all these great movies and stories that I didn't think I would like at that age, and that I really liked, and realized how many jokes I hadn't been understanding because they referenced these movies. And I just kept digesting films and pop culture ever since.
Okay. And then how did you become the film critic? Like how like, because that was something that I studied to do, right? To be a film critic. I was going to school for that until something happened. I changed my mind. But how did you become like a film critic and latch onto that?
I just asked.
Wow.
I did. Yeah. Like a radio station in town was starting their own website that was supposed to it was a cluster of radio stations, and they started this website called Toasted Rab. It's a St. Louis thing. It's too much to explain, but and it was going to be like non-branded to any of the stations, but then the stations would feed people into this website and be like a general St. Louis entertainment like blog kind of thing. And so I was like, and I had worked in radio, and I was like, hey, do you have a movie critic? They were like, no. And I was like, I'll be that. I could be your movie critic. And they're like, okay. And so I just started going to see movies, and they'd give me $10 for every movie review I wrote. And so I would just go see movies, and I'd crank out a review. And then that's when I started going to the screenings more and ran into Kevin. And then when that website kind of went under, I was like, what now? And I wrote for Review STL for a while, but it was just writing. That's too much work. And so we started the podcast. And here we are.
Oh, wow. That's quite the journey.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's funny that you talk about, because Jonny and I, like, we get it. Like, we're VCR kids, right? I mean, that was big when we were, which is funny because on Real Spoilers, like, I'm surprised that Kevin and Joe know what VCRs are. You know what I mean? Because it's constantly, I guess the running gag is like, you're the kind of the old
I'm the old guy.
Right?
Yeah.
Who's referencing stuff like George Burns and the Twilight Zone and things like that. You're talking about your readers, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I have them on right now. You want to hear a funny George Burns story real quick? So Kevin, one day, he sends me this clip to the It's Gary Shandling show. I don't know if you've ever seen it. You remember it? Yeah. And so and I watched it all the time when I was a kid, and he's going on about how much he loves It's Gary Shandling show. Like, he had just kind of gone down that rabbit hole. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember that show. And it was weird because it would air on Showtime, but then Fox picked it up and would air it like a week later on like the Fox network, the fledgling Fox network. And he was and you didn't have to edit out much, but occasionally. Yeah. And so he was like, oh, I love how, like, he's like, it's a show, and like, it's a show about his life, and he steps out and the audience is right there, and he's talking to the audience, and then he steps back into the show. He's like, oh my God, the guy's just genius. He's like, nobody's ever done anything like that before. And I was like, Kevin, I was like, hold please. I'm over to the YouTubes, and I sent him a clip of George Burns of the old Burns and Allen show. And I was like, this is George Burns doing it in like 1954. I'm like, he totally poached that from George Burns. And I don't mean to besmirch Gary Shandling. He is a genius, and that show was great. But I'm like, but I think Gary Shandling would have been the first to tell you, like, oh no, I saw George Burns do that. But like, Burns and Allen did that all the time about, like, they were in a show, but they were filming a show at the same time, and they would introduce scenes like on a stage and then step into them. It's like very, very modern sensibility.
Right. Well, like we're at a place, like, we're at an age, I guess, where we know like a different kind of pop culture level than what other people. Like, you look at it like Inception or whatever, like different layers of like layers, anything like that, a different, stuff that we absorb, things like that. And so it's just funny, and nothing against Kevin, because that's, he's watching the Gary Shandling show. I mean, it seems new to him,
for sure.
Right? Even though it's been done before, but like, it's one of those things where there's nothing new under the sun. And we don't want to declare, oh, this is the first time this, because it's probably not, right? But we have that because of our experience. And that's, it's good that they have you on that show to kind of, oh, wait a minute, this has been done this before and this before, that kind of thing.
Right. But, and, also in defense of Kevin, where can you see the Burns and Allen show?
Just readily accessible, right?
Yeah, like, I mean, I guess it's probably up on YouTube. It's probably one of those shows somebody's uploaded and no copyright holder even knows they hold the copyright, and so they don't care, and it's still living over there probably. But like, it's not playing on any network, right? Like, not even with all the proliferations of networks, of all these like MeTV and all that kind of stuff that's like really like going deep on some stuff in a way that you haven't seen in a long time. Like, you don't typically go back to the 50s for TV shows. Like, if you see something from the 50s, it's going to be probably, Honeymooners, I Love Lucy. That's it.
Right. Something that's more in the cultural kind of zeitgeist. Johnny, you and I have talked about that before. It's like you've got to know, you just can't start fresh and assume that the latest superhero movie is the first time something's been done, right? I mean, John, what are kind of the things that we've talked about, and what is your opinion on something like that, Johnny? As far as like knowing, you've got to know the pop culture that's come before you.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to do your research. You have to know what you're talking about before you talk about it.
Yeah.
And we tend to do that. You're a big research guy. You like to get all the trivia out there for us when we do our shows. I'm more the filmmaking acting guy, but like I say, I think that's important. I think you have to know, what the background is first.
It doesn't. We talked about this with Jason at Binge Movies on it. It doesn't make it less enriching if you know that something you're watching is like the 17th iteration of something that's come before. You've got to know, you don't have to, you just don't go out and declare that, oh, this is the first time this has been. Don't be that blasé about stuff, right? But
for sure,
look at what's informed the people that you're watching, like stuff like that. It's so important that you know your history instead of coming at it and thinking, oh, this is the first time it's ever been done. But it's like, oh, well, hold on a second, it's actually, which is what 70s movies are, right? I mean, the big thing that we've talked about this season, Tom, is when you look at the movie brats, when you look at Scorsese, you look at Spielberg and Coppola and De Palma, they are taking, and again, there was that thing where the 50s, 60s, these big lavish studio blockbusters were just falling out of favor with people, and people just weren't going anymore. And so the 70s were this big boom of these filmmakers that grew up on those movies, but they're taking those things. They're taking, Creature from the Black Lagoon. They're taking James Cagney movies. They're taking, horror movies, things like that. But they're repurposing them in new and refreshing ways that are kind of blowing people's minds, because, and it's not just like today, it's the Leonardo DiCaprio pointing to, oh, I recognize that. It's like Ghostbusters Afterlife, like, who are you going to call? And that's it. There's nothing else than just the reference. But what the movie brats were doing is they were taking these things that they grew up on, whether they knew it or not, subconsciously or consciously, and they were repurposing them, repackaging them in new forms. Like Star Wars is the ultimate version of that. Star Wars is taking from Kurosawa, it's taking from Westerns, it's taking from Conrad. And again, people are watching it going, well, this is brand new. I've never seen this before. And no, it's just Lucas taking all these things that he's known and making it seem fresh and new. And so that's, as far as 70s movies go, Tom, and since we're kind of the same, it's nice having someone that's the same age instead of having to explain these things that, oh, there was a decade before you were born, right? The time just didn't start when you're born. But what do you think about 70s movies, and what is the influence on the 70s in your mind or your experience?
Well, I think the 70s are like you said, with those filmmakers, it's the first generation of filmmakers, I feel like, that grew up on films, right? Like they grew up watching movies, and they were the ones who really, like, the people who were making movies originally, most of them didn't consider it art. They went to work. It was a machine, and they were a cog in that machine. And one week they'd direct a Western, or one week they'd be in a Western, and the next week a gangster movie. And they would, but there were, within that machine, there were artists, there were auteurs that were doing the craft differently. And that generation of filmmakers that really blossomed in the 70s, they started to notice that. They started to notice, like, why do I like this Western better than that Western? Oh, John Ford, right? Why do I like, why do I like this gangster movie better than that gangster movie? Oh, Howard Hawks. Oh, I've seen his name on other things, right? And they started to connect these dots. And that's where you get, the Scorseses and the Lucases and Spielberg and Bogdanovich and De Palma, like, and I know it's not the 70s, but like Raiders of the Lost Ark is famously, Spielberg was like, I love those cheesy old serials. What if we made one, but we did it with money? And like, it actually gave it money and treated it like a real thing. And like, I mean, and he, I know people credit Jaws as being the first summer blockbuster, and it is, but I feel like in a lot of ways Raiders was the first purposefully manufactured one, right? Like Star Wars was a happy accident. Like, no, you know, Jaws was a happy accident, but Raiders was like, okay, we can do this over and over again. It's not just lightning striking, right? And so, like, yeah, I think that's what you really see in the 70s. And you see filmmakers, as the old studio system falls away, as the old rating system falls away and is replaced by the new, you know, what we now are used to, the, you know, GPGR. You really see a just a different style of movie, right? And it did feel totally different because Americans hadn't seen movies like that. You know, they hadn't seen movie, and I know this is 60s, but like The Graduate, like that was like nothing people had seen before, and it worked on them in a way that they didn't even really fully understand why it was working. And I think that's what also created the next generation of film lovers, because they were like, why does this movie work on me? Like, it's so different from anything that I'm used to seeing. And then that guy or girl would want to just kind of get under the hood and start picking it apart to see, like, oh, they use these camera angles, or they shot it on this kind of stock, or they use this sort of lighting, or, you know, the acting styles are, you know, we're no longer taking stage actors and putting them on film. We're taking people who've always known film was an option, right? So like it's different.
Yeah.
You had a lot of very different things coming at you.
I love the way you describe that. Like, you've seen so many Westerns, but why does this one? Oh, that's a Howard, or that's a John Ford. That's a Howard Hawks. You know, why is, you know, even John Wayne, who's like just a staple, like, why is he better in this movie than in this other movie? Like, why am I getting more from him? Right.
Like, I love that you mentioned John Wayne. I didn't watch a John Wayne movie until I was probably 25. Okay. Because well, like I said earlier, my parents were divorced, so I didn't have a dad around to make me watch John Wayne movies. And so so when they would show, you know, you had the two independent channels, and they would show movies on Saturdays, and it was always like one was showing a John Wayne movie and the other was showing an Abbott and Costello movie. I'm gonna go with the Abbott and Costello movie, right? I didn't care about Westerns or war movies. I was just like, that's, you know, that's guy stuff. I know I'm a guy, but like that stuff didn't do anything for me, right?
Right.
And so finally at 25, I was like, you know, this guy made like 100 movies. He's a legend, right? Like, he's a legend for a reason. And I was like, I should probably at least, like, let's watch the top tier and see what that is. And I started, the first one I ever watched was Red River.
Ooh, yeah.
And I was like, well, holy crap, I've been lied to. Like, this guy can act. Like, that Red River is a tour de force performance, which I was not anticipating, right? And so I was just like, holy crap. Like, I did not expect that. Now, make no mistake, John Wayne's made a lot of really substandard stuff, especially with the modern eye. It can get, you know, boring or jingoistic or what have you. But I was just like really taken aback, because that is not what I was expecting to get, you know? And so then I was like, well, what else is out there? Because, like, I don't even know if I'd ever fully watched a Western. Like, I'd probably seen Young Guns because, you know, I was 18 when it came out. So, but so then I just went down the rabbit hole on John Wayne, and I'm like, you know, and so then it's like, oh wow, yeah, The Searchers and Rio Bravo, and like, I mean, there's some great stuff, and I'm always trying to get people that think they hate John Wayne. I'm like, watch this one and then come back and let me know if you still hate John Wayne, you know?
Yeah. But again, that kind of ties in with what you're talking about. It's like, you want to get the full spectrum, right? You want to get, like, so you know that he's good, and that helps your appreciation for certain movies or certain directors, right? You talking about, why does this movie make me feel this way? Like, Jaws was that for me. I was like, why am I identifying with this character? Why is this movie scaring me so much? And so that's what I dove in. I think, Johnny, like, was Taps your experience with that? What was your lightning
Taps
rod?
is one of the first ones that kind of got me hooked. I was really young with my dad. But yeah, that one kind of opened my eyes to, like, you know, what a movie can make you feel. And just the feeling that left with you, and as you would go throughout your day, like I couldn't get out of my head, like what was that I just saw? You know what I mean?
Right.
And I love that when movies can give you that kind of experience. And so that's kind of I look for when I watch films is give me that experience. Let me feel something. Let me ruminate in it for a week afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely.
Taps is was probably like even more resonant for you because you were watching kids that were, if not your age, an age you knew you were gonna be very soon.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't adults caught up in this world of, gangsters or gunplay or what have you. It was people that were your own age, or maybe if you had an older brother his age.
Yeah.
And like so I'm sure it probably like was a gut check in a way that just a cop movie wouldn't have been.
My mom was mad at my dad for showing it to me.
Oh, that's how you know you saw a good movie. When
And
your parents are mad that you saw it.
It's
Like,
PG
yeah.
though, right? Still a PG rated
Yeah,
movie,
but
isn't it?
there's some violence in it.
Yeah, it's a tough movie. And again, when we covered that, that was fun being able to, oh yeah, like look at Tom Cruise like getting fourth billing in a movie. It was interesting. But like,
That's
Jaws
why
is
they
mine.
call it the good old days.
Absolutely. Taps is one of Tom, what was, and then we'll get to our movie. I'm just having a great time here. But like, what was your move, like your lightning rod move, if you could pick one?
Oh man. I would probably have to say my lightning rod movie was Paper Moon.
Ooh.
I remember seeing Paper Moon, and it was somehow
That's
in
Bogdanovich,
sync.
right?
Yes,
Okay.
Bogdanovich,
Okay.
his finest film, in my opinion. And I remember that movie was somehow, its TV scheduling was somehow in sync with me getting sick.
Okay.
And so like I would be up late at night, unable to sleep. And so I would like sneak out into the living room and turn on the TV because I couldn't sleep and I wasn't feeling well. I just lay on the couch,
Yeah.
and Paper Moon was on. And I'm probably watching this movie 9, 10 years old, right? So it's starring this girl who's roughly my age. And at that age, I don't know any of these actors, right? Like I don't know who any of these people are. I mean, obviously there are lots of famous people in this movie I know now, but to me at that age, they weren't in the Apple Dumpling Gang. How am I going to know who they are? And so um and I was just riveted by this film. And and uh I knew nothing about it. And like they would go to commercial and like they would just go to commercial and come back. They didn't tell you the name of the movie. So I didn't even know the name of the movie for years.
Wow.
It was just this thing I saw. And and then like I would get sick again and it would be on again. And I was just like, why does this movie list what should be, especially to a 9 or 10-year-old kid, what on its surface should be a pretty boring movie.
Uh-huh.
It's just people driving and talking, you know, and uh and I was hooked, man. And so I just really was like, why does this work? I don't understand. And I think that's when I really started to like seek out movies that I didn't think I would like, because I saw one that like if I had read the description in the TV guide, I would have never watched,
Yeah.
and it is probably my all-time favorite movie.
Because you recognize yourself in it. There's just
Yeah.
something that spoke to you. You don't know, and that's the magic of movies. And
Yeah.
I love hearing stories like that. But again, it's like, don't shut yourself off from all these other experiences. Like I'm it's almost like the universe was getting you to watch that and was making you
For
watch
sure.
that movie, right? Because
Absolutely.
why would you watch this? But again, you're broadening your horizons. It's making it so much richer that you can now see why you love movies, why how Paper Moon or whatever kind of filtered into other movies, and I recognize that, or these feelings. And so yeah, that's all great. And when we're talking about 70s movies, Johnny and I did a 90s Palooza our last season, because those are the movies that Johnny and I cut our teeth on. That's when we fell in love
Right.
with movies and we started studying everything. But like, and we got a lot of hits, like a lot of listens and a lot of interactions. And then Johnny and I decided, let's do 70s. Like, let's go, because Johnny was like, there's all these movies that I haven't seen, right, Johnny? It's
Right.
like, let's do this. And we haven't had the same kind of interaction and feedback, because I think a lot of people just recognize the 90s stuff because that's what they grew up on. But when they see stuff like Apocalypse Now, or they see stuff like Dirty Harry, things like that, it's like, well, I don't know what that is, so I'm not even going to bother. Like, it's like, and there's just this weird attitude about, if it came out before when I was born, there's no reason for me to watch it. If it's not in color, I don't need to watch it. If it's not in the English language, I don't need to watch it. And Johnny and I are always like, well, you're cutting yourself off from so much.
You're kind of missing out if you don't go back and watch the old ones.
Yeah, you are. And I think the 90s is very similar to the 70s in that that's when you get the rash of filmmakers who grew up on the 70s movies, right? And so they're, those films were their touchstones, and that's when the art house really entered the mainstream. So once again, you started seeing a lot of very different movies that were popping into the zeitgeist, because you could get, they figured out how to make movies with smaller budgets still be profitable, and like I said, the rise of the art house and whatnot.
Because it doesn't, special effects are great, action sequences are great, but there's something you can do with just a limited budget, with their imagination, or just topics that you wouldn't necessarily think that are for you, that can really dive deep and kind of hit you in the feels or the gut, that kind of thing. You don't need a giant, again, we're going to be called elitist because we're kind of banging on blockbusters. $300 million movies can be great, but there's also like
absolutely
a $5 million movie that can be much more life affirming. And don't cut yourself off from that stuff. That's the real thing here. But like seeing into Dog Day Afternoon, that kind of thing, and I think this movie fits that anti-establishment kind of ideal that people were looking for. There's the scenes where Sonny is out, like he's getting the crowd riled up and they're on his side and stuff like it. So it really fits into a lot of that stuff that we're noticing with these movies that we've been covering this season. And obviously I want to talk about Lumet and his filmography. This is not the first Lumet movie I've seen. I think the first Lumet movie that I saw was Death Trap. And then obviously 12 Angry Men is one of the greatest directed movies of all time. If I was to put like a top 5 or a top 10 of these movies are the best directed, 12 Angry Men would have to be on there because of it's in one room, but it's so riveting and it pulls you in, that kind of. But why is it doing it? And so you study all the different ways and the camera shots and the angles and the ceiling being so all that stuff, right? That's you're missing out if you don't kind of branch out and check out the other Howard Hawks, the other John Fords, that kind of, you're missing out. But like you said, Tom, it's like, oh, I like that guy, I'm going to go find other stuff by him, and you're just amazed by it. But like with Dog Day Afternoon, I know that when you and I, Tom, we've been talking about having you on for a while. Like, we had Kevin on for when you guys were around 700, and so I was like, well, I got to get you guys on. It's just, and sorry to age you, but when we're doing 70s,
you're fine.
Like, well, Tom would know about 70s movies because
this is his sweet spot.
That's we'll have a good conversation there. So I gave you a list. I think Serpico is on there, but Dog Day Afternoon, just to kind of a spoiler for me, is I'd never seen it before. It's always been one that I've wanted to watch. So when I saw Dog Day Afternoon on your list, I was like, let's do that, because I've always wanted to watch it. But why? Let me ask you, Tom, why was Dog Day Afternoon on that initial list that you sent back? Why did you want to talk about this movie?
So Dog Day Afternoon, my introduction to Dog Day Afternoon was very similar to Paper Moon, in that it popped up on cable, and so luckily I didn't have to watch an edited for TV version, which would be a waste of everyone's time and energy. But and I had no idea what it was. I typically didn't go for, like, I preferred, at that age especially, I preferred comedies. I liked Abbott and Costello, I liked Martin and Lewis, but not Lewis. I liked like that was the kind of movies that I liked. And so I didn't expect to like this movie. I'm like, a bank robbery movie. It's very, we didn't have the term at the time. It's very bro, right? Like that was kind of my thought going in. And it just grabbed me from the get-go and pulled me in. And I was just like, I have no idea what's going to happen. Like, it's, and it's, as I get older, that really is something I enjoy in a movie, because once you've seen enough movies, you pretty much know what's going to happen, even if you like the movie. So when you have a movie where you're in the last 20 minutes and you're just like, I legit don't know what they're going to do, like, those are great. But like, obviously it's a lot easier to do that to a kid, but but like, yeah, I didn't know what was going to happen. Like, is he going to get away? Like, and I was like conflicted too. Like, I kind of want him to get away with it, but like, I also kind of don't. And so like, that was new. Like, I don't know that maybe it's the first anti-hero movie I ever saw. You know what I mean? Like, it was like, that was a novel concept for me of like, why do I like this guy even though I know what he's doing is wrong? Like, that's, like, that's not appropriate. It's not even like they gave him a reason, a motivation, like, oh, I've got a sick kid at home, right? Like, if they really wanted to stack the deck, and I know this is based on a true story, but if they really wanted to stack the deck, that you flip it and you're like, oh, my dog has cancer and we can't let a puppy die, and so now you John Wick it, and John Wick's great, but like, that's what they're doing, right? Oh, it's okay for him to kill all these people because look what they did to this cute puppy. And um so like, it just really it really hooked me in a way that I did not expect.
Right. Okay. That's great. That's a great story. And again, if you're looking at Lumet movies, you add Network, you add The Verdict onto that. Again, classic, solid Hollywood movies, right?
Yeah.
Dog Day Afternoon is probably in his top tier of those are the ones you have to watch. If you're going to watch a batch of Lumet movies, Dog Day Afternoon is one of them. Network
Absolutely.
is one of them, right? But so I feel bad that I never got around to it. I just think that, you look for the opportunities to, like Johnny wanted to do with these 70s movies. It's like, yeah, that's in there. I want to watch. I've always wanted to watch this movie. Let's talk about it. But Johnny, was this your first experience with Dog Day Afternoon, or had you seen it before?
Well, I was familiar with it. I mean, I've seen the iconic Attica scene several times. I knew that was going to be in there, so I knew that was coming. But yeah, like you, Darin, I hadn't seen it all the way through. I'd seen clips here and there, but I'd never seen it from start to finish. And so this was my first time watching it. And I have to apologize, but it always happens to me. I don't know what it is, but I can be awake all night long for my job at work, and I can be awake as soon as I put on a movie like this, I fall asleep. So I had to watch it twice because I fell asleep. I got past the all the commotion with the gunshot, and then I dozed off. But watching it again, I kind of realized, hey, this was kind of a comedy. Like, even though it's kind of played as a drama, there's some comedic elements here. And I started laughing in the beginning opening scenes, and all the fumbling around, and the one kid wanting to get out of there, and like just the safe being empty, the vault being empty. I was like, I started laughing a lot more, and I was like, this is kind of funny. And so I kind of got, more on board with it, and I was able to stay awake the second time. So
well, on some level, it's kind of a comedy of errors, right? Like, I know it's weird to describe this movie as a comedy, but especially that first act, like, he can barely get the gun out of the box of flowers, and then like, and then it goes from a comedy of errors to almost a comedy of manners, where like the girls are like, but what if we have to pee? Well, who all has to pee? Now let's take you back and forth. Like, it's like, it's just
he gives them a trash can or something.
Yeah.
And it's like,
now they all have to go. I laughed at that.
Right. But like, that's part of how they suck you into rooting for the guy, right? You're like, he's not a dick. Like, it's like, oh yeah, like, I'm not here to hurt you guys. Like, like, he makes that very clear. Like, you never feel like he is a threat to the workers of the bank, right? Like, he just wants his money, and he's gonna leave, and he's telling the cops he'll kill them, and maybe Cazale will kill him because he's crazy. Like, you don't know what that guy's gonna do, but like, know that Sonny is not looking or wanting to hurt people, and so so like, that enables you to like root for him, because he's not he's not a killer.
One of the moments I loved was when he was showing one of the girls how to use the weapon, how to like flip it around. Like, that was so funny to me. I don't know what it was. I was busting up.
No, it's a cute moment, and it's also like a wonderful piece of exposition, right? Because like, it establishes that like, he's in the military, and he doesn't want to kill people, but you also know that he knows how to kill people, and that and given when this was made, right? If he was in the military, then he was in Vietnam. So he probably has killed people. So like, and all that is conveyed in that one little cute kind of funny moment, but like, that you're laughing at, but it's and rightly so. But like, it's all but it's also giving you all this other information about who he is. It's
Yeah, because they
masterful.
don't actually give you exposition very much in this
No.
when it starts. You have no idea who they are, why they're there, what they're doing, and so you kind of have to. You know what? Hell, sometimes I like when films do that. Sometimes I'm on board with it, and sometimes I'm not. I'm like, well, wait a minute, who is this guy, and why should I care, and why am I following him? And it was kind of that way at first for me with this one. I was like, okay, why do I care? What's the reason for this? Why are they robbing the bank? But then again, once you kind of got on board with it, you started to kind of like, as it got revealed slowly over time, you're like more willing to kind of keep going and see what's going to happen next. And so I did appreciate that.
So
I wonder if when the movie came out, if it played that way for people, because I think this was a pretty well-known story.
Right.
And and it was also, it's based on a magazine article, yet it still was nominated for best original screenplay. I don't understand.
Yeah.
But so like I wonder if the average film goer like knew the story, and they didn't necessarily sit there and wonder the same things,
Yeah. Well, obviously talking about the John Voidovich, right? That was his name. It's like the bank robbery, I think it's 72, something like that. This is based on that. And again, Lumet wanted to, listening to him talk about it, he wanted to keep it as real as possible, and so they're shots that kind of match like the actual footage. I thought so. Johnny, you're talking about the two things that I really noticed is, number one, just like you said, Johnny, I didn't realize this was a comedy. I've always thought of this as like a thriller or a drama. So when I was laughing so much, it's not because of gags, it's not because of jokes, it's because these were it pulls us in. It's such a brilliant move. I think Frank Pearson, the guy that wrote the screen, such a brilliant move in his part, that the humor is humanizing, right? We recognize that, we see that in ourselves, so that's what pulls us in. And then gradually over time, we get more and more insight into who this person is, to the point where he's on the phone with both his wife and with Leon. And to me, it was like crushing, because this guy has nobody. He's just, his whole life is there to kind of appease other people. And that's what his whole life has been. But it isn't making them happy. So he's been trying, I don't know, just the way that, like we talked about, it slowly parses out information, Johnny, like you said, that we get pulled more and more in. I thought that was fascinating as a structure. When he says, Tom, that he was a Vietnam veteran, I thought he was joking at first, because he's so goofy and he doesn't know what he's doing. And again, this movie ties in with that disillusionment after Vietnam. So I just thought, oh, he's using this as kind of, but then it's revealed, oh no, he's in the military. He was in Vietnam. And so you're like, he's just as disillusioned. And I love, again, I was dying at the parts where he goes out to talk to the Durning character. People are just cheering for him, and you can feel him just start to feel like a hero. And I don't know, to me it felt like that was his downfall. Like he started thinking that was who he's going to get away with this. He's a legend, right? Like he has to. And slowly though, it dawns on you that he's just not. He's such a sad character. I love that structure of it. Tom, what did you think about as far as the structure goes? Was that, and maybe you mentioned this already, how was that structure magic for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the structure is definitely designed to pull you in and just to wonder what's going on, and it gives you just enough information to keep you interested, and then gives you information, especially at the time, that makes you be like, what is happening? Like, he says, bring me my wife, and then they bring him a man, and obviously, that is more, we're more used to seeing that today, but at the time that was really like, what is happening, you were talking about his downfall, and I think his downfall is that at his core, he's a decent dude, right? Like, if he'd have came in, got the money, and got out, he'd have been okay. But instead, he's like, oh, these ladies have to go to the bathroom, and he keeps stopping to be polite to people, and it delays his getting out of the bank before the cops get there. And if he hadn't, like, that was ultimately his downfall, was his politeness,
It's kind of like Hamlet in that way. His inaction is what makes him kind of the tragic hero.
Absolutely. But yeah, then the movie's got very much a slice of life quality about it. Like, you feel like you're there, you feel like you're in that bank. And I think a lot of what does that is ironically, or coincidentally for our purposes, the same thing. It does one major thing that Paper Moon also does, and that is there is no score in this movie.
Right.
There's no music. Any music you hear, it's very slight, is 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 incidental. It's coming out of a radio or a television, and even that's very little. And like you get the Elton John song over the opening montage, but even that you see as it fades out is coming out of the car stereo. Um, but there's no score to tell you how to feel, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's why this movie also ages so well with the topics it's dealing with, especially with with Leon and this what they at the time would have called a sex change operation. Um, is that um because there's no score, it doesn't tell you how to feel about Leon. It just presents Leon, right? And um and when the movie does make a judgment, it's the public making the judgment, right? Like the crowd loves Sonny until they find out that Sonny is gay and or probably really bi, but in their perceptions, I don't even know if bisexuality was a thing that people knew existed. So it would just been gay or straight, right? And so the crowd turns on him, and not even that they don't like him, they don't respect him, right? Like now he's a clown and they're mocking him when he comes out when he frisks somebody, and so, but it's not the film doing that, right? It's the crowd, and that is what the crowd would do at that time, right? Like, so it's not a judgment that the filmmaker is making. And I think if there was a score, like, you run the risk of there's funny music playing when the crowd turns on them or what have you. And so because there's no score, you're just a witness. You're just watching it transpire.
Well, in some ways, I think the silence or the non-use of score still works the same way that a score would, right? I mean, you've got the crowd that's kind of the noise and things like that. You've got the quiet. Johnny, one of the things, like, again, I watched this late last night, and so there were times where I was kind of, because there are long moments of silence where it's just, you're just watching, again, I think maybe it was Andrew Sarris or something like that, talked about how Pacino in this movie acts with the whites of his eyes. Like, I noticed the whites of his eyes so much, and he seems crazed, and he's just exasperated. He's trying to do these, and it's not working for him. And so he's just manic constantly. But there are long stretches where he's just wandering around and just very quiet. And so I understand, like, if you're watching this, it does kind of lull you into something. But when you notice the character kind of things, like Cazale, who we talked about in The Godfather, right, and in Deer Hunter, he's in 5 movies with his whole career before he died of cancer, right?
He's in 5 movies, all 5 of them nominated for Best Picture.
What a legend. Right yeah. And it's funny because watching him in this, obviously Pacino is great. Pacino is next level in this. He's carrying it. He's everything. He's exasperated. He pulls us in. He's pathetic. He's heroic. Like, we can sense that he wants to accomplish, and that's why we want to root for him, because he's so pathetic. We just want to see him gain some upper hand, right? But watching Cazale, I was like, part of me was watching going, he's not doing anything. Like, for the whole movie, he's just kind of quiet, and he's sitting there and he's morose. But I think that's also acting, right? I don't know what Sal is doing for most of the time, and if he's in danger. But he says he's not going back to prison, that kind of. But let's, talk about those 2 performances. Tom, what do you think Pacino and Cazale and Chris Sarandon, who I thought, again, there's no score to tell you, but his performance tells you. What do you think of those 3 actors? How would you?
It's a tour de force, right? They're nominated for Oscars for a reason, and Cazale is really good he's definitely from the less is more school of acting, whereas Pacino is from the more is more school of acting. Right. And but they both work, right? And they counterbalance each other, and Cazale is the real menace, right? He's the one you really got to watch. Like, he's the one that could flip at any moment and start killing people. And there is this kind of weight hanging over the movie of, like, is he going to screw it up? is he going to screw it up for Sonny by reacting poorly, and Chris Sarandon is Leon. Like that's such a one for Pacino and Sarandon both. It like those were pretty brave roles to even take on at that point in time. Like if actors didn't want to play gay characters for fear of never being asked to play a straight character again, and so like that, it's not right, but it was a very real concern for actors. I know Pacino like accepted and then walked away from this role, I think 3 times before he finally said, okay, I'll do it. And so Sarandon, obviously he's a new actor. He gets offered a role in a big movie. He's kind of got to take it. But Pacino could, he could pick and choose at that point. So, but yeah, I mean, it is, Pacino is just also a powder keg in a different way. And it's fascinating to watch.
Well, I want to get, Johnny, I'm going to ask you obviously about the performances. Pacino, like you said, Tom, he's the more is more kind of thing. But I think he's become kind of a parody of himself, like
for
now,
sure,
because that's all he's doing, right? It's like, but like when you watch him in this, when you watch him in The Godfather, and especially The Godfather 2, where Johnny and you and I talked about it, it's a performance where it's all in his eyes. Michael Corleone in part 2 is just, he's watching, he's trying to parse out who his enemies are, who his friends are. And you can see him searching with his eyes. And he does the same thing here. It's just a fully loaded performance. The camera work it's exasperated when he's exasperated. It's calm when he's calm. I think it like 12 Angry Men, it really makes you feel claustrophobic, whether you're outside, whether you're inside. Like I like how it uses like almost newsreel type footage when it shows all the cops outside and then kind of finagling and managing everybody, and then the inside it's like manic, and but again it's very, but Pacino, like you said, he's a powder keg, but it's like, I don't know, like he's at the top of his game here, right? And there's just so much humanity to that performance. But Johnny, out of and Sarandon, I think Lumet's direction to him was, don't do Blanche Dubois, do more Manhattan housewife, right? And so that's kind of what he did. But it humanizes the character. That's Lumet's biggest gift, is he would always humanize his actors. But like as far as the performances go, those 3 especially, John, I mean, what is your gauge on the performances?
Well, I really liked Pacino, and I agree with you, Darin. I think a lot of that performance was done with his eyes, and you really see the struggle. I mean, you see every single thought that he has, and that's what makes it so intriguing and so fun to watch. And with Cazale, yeah, man. I mean, he's quiet, but it's unnerving. He's so quiet. You're like, you're waiting, like you said, you're waiting for that moment. When's he going to kill somebody? And then also that kind of keeps you interested, like. You want to know more about that character, and you slowly find out more about him as the movie goes on. You learn that their plan was to commit suicide. You learn that he doesn't want to go to prison. You learn that, he just has these little moments. So you go, okay. And you want to know more, and you want to know more. And at the end, they're like, keep that gun pointed up. Don't accidentally let that gun go off. And so you're like, you're waiting for someone to get shot. You're waiting for something bad to happen. And so I like Cazale's performance. It was, like I say, it was quiet, but it was good. I think that's what it needed. And like you mentioned before, it was a good counterbalance from the two. The one with the all the energy and the excitement with Pacino, and then the quiet, subdued performance with Cazale. Sarandon, it was just fun watching Humperdinck being someone other than Humperdinck. So that was fun. I thought he was great.
And Jack Skellington.
Yeah. I also Carol Kane, seeing how young she was, I was like, oh my gosh, how young Carol Kane is. That was great.
It slowly dawned on me when they pull her out from under the desk. I'm like, is that?
Yeah. That's one of the first big laughs I had when they said, hey, she's still hiding under the desk.
Yeah.
So, I thought overall great performances. The acting was pretty good. I don't know. Not that it was a bad performance. I just didn't really like the cop outside that he was talking to. Just a lot of yelling, kind of like, okay, we get it. You're a cop, you're yelling. But
well, I just went through puberty there. Anyway, I thought that the Durning character, it's the scene that I loved is when they're just shouting at each other after the cops try to break into the back, and they're just shouting the same thing for like 2 minutes. I was dying laughing because Durning he's trying to make sense of it, but now he's become like, they're in a shouting match. He's become the person that he's trying to stop. I just thought that was, he had so much humor, and I think this is the kind of movie that it's everything. It's got that humor, but then it's so crushingly sad the longer it goes.
Yeah. It's interesting in that you see the inverse of what you normally see with police and the FBI in films. Typically, it's the FBI coming in and the local cops being like, we don't need the FBI, and we're the ones that really know what's going on in our community, and most films side with the cops on that. And in this situation, it's like Durning is in over his head, right? Like he is not good at this, and he is messing it up royally, and he is gonna get people killed. And it's the FBI that comes in and saves the day, essentially. I mean, even though we're kind of rooting for Sonny, like the cops are the problem, and the FBI is the one that actually resolves the situation with remarkably little bloodshed. There's only one death in this movie.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is like Durning, I think he loses control because Sonny is gaining the confidence of the crowd, right? And they're
right.
The Attica thing, especially. Or I like when Durning is on the bullhorn and they're just mocking him for whatever
right.
he's saying, right? It's like he's losing, he doesn't have the control there. And when they cut to the FBI guy, what is his name? Sheldon, James Broderick, they keep cutting the shots of him just sitting watching, just a close-up, watching, and you're like, oh, he's up to something. They don't let you know what's going on. So the final like 5 minutes is a surprise because we know something's going to happen. We just don't know that it was heading in that direction. Again, just a movie that's constantly surprising you. And I as far as the screenplay goes, I know that One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest like stole all the oxygen out of the room at the Oscars, but like the fact that this won the original, I think it's the same thing with Barbie being nominated. What was the controversy there? It was like, why is it adapted when it's original? It's like, well, as long as it's nominated, right? I mean, you want to get that, but you also want the whatever movie. Again, I can't keep track of whatever one, but it's like as it was at least nominated, so it got that respect. Same thing with this. It's like, sure, like it doesn't make sense that it's based on an article, but like, yeah, award instead of Bo Goldman or whoever wrote the screenplay for Cuckoo's Nest. It's like, yeah, give him this because this screenplay is so well structured. It's so well done. It's like a model for other people to follow. And
it's interesting in that it is also almost like a play, right? I mean, it's it takes place in practically one set. I mean, it's largely in the bank and the street outside the bank. There's obviously the car in the airport at the end, but it's very similar to 12 Angry Men in a lot of ways in that regard.
Right. It's like a play, but it's still very cinematic, right?
Yeah.
Who was it? Victor J. Kemper was the cinematographer here. Johnny, as far as the filmmaking goes, we talked about last time with Dirty Harry, Tom, how some of the shots in the daytime were just so blindingly bright, and then some of the shots in nighttime, you can't even see what was going on. I mean, what do you think of the filmmaking, the cinematography compared?
I think it goes along the same lines like we've been talking about of these 70s films where it's more point and shoot, and it's not a whole lot of I mean, there is really these long shots that just kind of go on forever, and also with the lighting, this was a little better than Dirty Harry. It wasn't so dark when it was at night. It was lit a little better, but it was still had the same, like it was really bright or it was really dark. And just these long shots, it would just kind of like last forever. And that's kind of a thing back then. And I don't know if that's something that, you have to kind of get used to, I guess. But if you don't like that kind of thing, but it works for the movie, though. It works for what they're trying to do.
Well, we compare, Tom, I'll get your opinion on that, but comparing The Godfather again to Goodfellas, like it's just the change in times. Like Goodfellas is very snappy and quick and just choppy because it's getting you pulled in, and The Godfather is very laid back, like you said, long shots, things like that. I mean, Tom, what is your, as far as cinematography in the 70s of these movies go, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it does use a lot of long establishing shots. It's really it's a fascinating time capsule of a New York that is no longer there. And that's one of the things I really like about some of these 70s movies is it does capture a New York that is long gone, right? And I found it fascinating, especially that opening montage toggling back and forth between the different people in New York and kind of going back and forth between like the poor parts and the rich parts and the but just how much it almost feels like a scene that was shot today to establish you were watching New York in the 70s, right? where that was just like here's New York, right? But like those shots that Lumet picked are so pitch perfect that like it transcends time in terms of how much it anchors it to that time, if that makes any sense. And that's really hard to do in the present day, right? To pick things that will resonate for your time period to future generations. And I was really struck by that.
Well, it's kind of a cinnamon verite kind of thing. There's a lot of handheld stuff.
Yeah.
I know that Lumet, when Sonny and Leon are talking on the phone, there's again long shots that go on longer than maybe, I think even Lumet said that, like longer than I probably should have shot them, that kind of thing. But it's like you pull so much out of the performance. You see so much again in the eyes and the way they're reacting to each other. I know that a lot of this movie was improvised as long as it stuck to kind of the bones of Pearson's script. When he and Leon are talking about where did he say he was going? I just had the where are you going to go on the airplane? It's Albania, is that right?
Algeria.
Algeria,
right? I think it was. Yeah.
And they have a conversation for like 2 minutes about how crazy that is, and I was laughing because it was like, well, you could cut away from this, but it's such a human moment where they're having a connection and they're just fighting about everyday stuff. It kind of pulls you in. But
yeah,
I get that, especially when we watched the Deer Hunter, Johnny. It just felt like a documentary because those shots it's 3 hours, and really it's just an hour and a half of material, but they've you know what I mean, it's you're just getting a snapshot of everything. It's just stretched out to the point where you're like, well, let's move on, or it's like, oh, this is real life. It's like it's hard to, there's definitely a difference in style, that kind of thing. And again, talking on the phone with Leon, this being an anti-establishment movie, them like the crowd, like, oh, they're getting a high on Sonny, like, talking back to the cops, like, put down your guns, that kind of thing, and being able to be in charge. I think the crowd was like so excited by that, and audiences too. This is a big kid. I think audiences are watching that just loved watching him beat the establishment, like beat the cops, like that kind of stuff. And again, I think the stuff with Leon is also anti-establishment. It's like it hadn't been done before. Like it's weird for audiences to kind of see this, and it does, the way that I like that it shows, like when he says get my wife out here, and it shows his actual ex-wife, and you think that's who's going to show up, right? But when Leon shows up, it throws you off. I'm not sure if it's trying to be unnerving, because one of the worst tropes today is when you have, like, again, there's a character on Walking Dead that they run into or whatever, and they like him and he's a likable character, but then when he, and I can't remember his name, but he meets up with his partner, it turns out it's a guy, and the show treats it as like, oh, this is a shock. It's like, well, why is that a shock? Like, why is that done so often? And again, I think, like we talked about, Tom, this might be the first time that they had that happen. I know that there's a backlash that audiences or the Academy didn't like that they had that character here, that the whole thing was for a sex change operation, like they say, even though it's based on the real story. This is actually, the motivations of the real thing. As far as anti-establishment goes and the way they handled that character, do you want to expound on that at all, Tom, about how they
I mean, I think they handled it fairly well. I mean, I know it's, three middle-aged cis guys talking, but I mean, it's also the reality of how that would have been perceived by the public at the time. They would have made fun of it. They would have thought it was a joke. Obviously, a large portion of the public today would still make fun of it. But I think that they've presented fairly straightforwardly of like, look, this is just, it is what it is, and it's what's going on. And I think that in and of itself was a pretty bold choice. I do think they're doing a little bit of a like surprise. And so maybe that part hasn't aged as well, but I also believe in taking films, viewing them within a historical context, and like that could have been played much worse. You know what I mean? And so like if your biggest complaint is, they hit you with the old switcheroo, I don't know that is really a fair complaint to throw on this film, especially when that was going to be shocking and surprising to probably 95% of the movie going public when this film was made, you know.
Well, whether they meant to or not, it's Lumet humanizing it. He loves these people. He loves every character. Every character gets a human moment, whether it's asthma or a diabetic attack, that kind of thing. It's like there's so much humanness in the movie, and the movie is all, it's about character. There's no real plot, so to speak. Like, it's a 2-hour movie of just them sitting in a bank. Like, that's really all it is, right? But the way that they, again, you're right, they could have handled it very badly, you know, for the time. But because it's Lumet, I think he gives Leon a humanity. He gives Sonny a humanity. He gives Sally humanity. Like, all the women in the bank are so human, right? And you just recognize everything. I guess the thing that, and then I'll ask each of you guys, the last thing that I want to say.
Actually, can I?
Oh, sure.
Can I sneak in one more thing before you move on?
Yeah.
In defense of the switcheroo, it's kind of a bait and switcheroo if you think about it, because he gets you on Sonny's side before he reveals that about Sonny, right? And that most people at that time probably wouldn't have been rooting for Sonny if they knew that going in, right? And so, like, getting you to root for Sonny and then revealing that, it's kind of almost saying, like, you know, well, you like this guy, but now you know this thing. Like, but what are you going to do about the fact that you already like him?
Yeah.
You know, and you kind of have to sit in that moment of like, oh, you know, because most people, especially back then, they didn't know gay people, or probably more correctly, they didn't know that they knew gay people. And so, like, you know, so now they have to, like, struggle with their stereotypes and what they thought that sort of person would look like.
And again, they could have played it as a cliche, like, instead of
absolutely,
they toned it down. But again, that's you. No matter what you think, these are still humans, especially during that conversation. They're humans, and so that's really it. It's like you're whatever their motivations are, whatever their likes or dislikes are. It's very empathizable, like what they're after, because, and again, it's the way that it's written, it's the way that it's acted, it's the way that it's directed. So, like I said, the last thing that I do want to mention about the movie is, it's really nothing. There's not a lot that happens in this movie, right? It's kind of like, and just to bring this in, Tom, in your Madam Web episode, it's like, once you guys talked about how once you start nitpicking one thing, you start nitpicking another thing, and then another.
For sure.
You have a whole list of things. But this movie, I think, when you again look at it, it's just the course of a day. They go into a bank, the cops show up, they haggle for a little bit, they leave. That's it. But it's stretched out to 2 hours. But the thing is, the opposite of Madam Web, you don't notice how slight it is, because there's so much meat that's on the skeletons of this thing, right? There's in the performances and the way that it's shot and the way that you recognize the human foibles, things like that. I just think that's what makes this movie so masterful. It's a small slice of something, but it pulls you in the ways that we've talked about.
John, it's very textured.
Exactly. So, Johnny, was there anything that we haven't talked about that you kind of wanted, like a final thought on the movie, like anything?
Yeah, a couple of things. One thing real quick. Didn't the real life guy, didn't he went to prison, right?
Yeah.
And
he was sentenced for 20, but he got out in 5.
And then he sold the rights to the film and then paid for the sex change operation, right? Isn't that what actually happened? So the Leon character actually got the sex change because of the rights of the movie being sold. Isn't that right?
Well, that is correct. Yeah. The movie says that Leon is currently living as a woman in New York City, and that was true. Yeah. But it was not the proceeds of the bank robbery, because they didn't get any. Right. It was. I don't think they had passed the law yet that said you can't profit from a crime. Like, if you're the perpetrator of the crime, you cannot profit from it.
I don't think it's funny that in the end they got what they wanted.
Yeah, I mean,
that's the one bright spot. Yeah.
And
go ahead.
And I think, I was gonna say, and I think the Leon character changed her name to Liz Eden and died of AIDS, I think, in 1987.
Right.
Okay. No, the one thing that really stood out to me was some of the editing choices were kind of weird for me. There's thing that I want to mention, and that was the time when he goes back to the back of the bank to check on the back door, and he notices that they're drilling and they're trying to come in, and so he panics and he fires that shot out the window. And when he fires that shot, there's like, I counted, there's like 13 or 14 different reactions to the gunshot. And it all takes place like within like a 10-15 second time frame. So there's like reaction, the gunshot, reaction, and then reaction, 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 like it's happening over and over and over again. And it was kind of like, how many reactions do we need of a single gunshot? I mean, I understand they're trying to create, you know, the chaos and the havoc and everything, but 1 or 2 reactions would be enough for me. I was done. I was like, and then I kept counting. No, there's more. There's more. There's still more. It was like, when's it going to end? You know? So that was something I thought was kind of weird.
Well, maybe it's, you know, Lumet trying to give everybody. I don't know.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah, I don't remember that shot. I don't remember those shots specifically. My first thought would be that maybe they're just trying to show how it's impacting. There's a lot of different vested interests in this. There's the tellers and how it will affect them. It's the cops and how it will affect them. It's the FBI and how it will affect them. It's Sonny and how it will affect,
the funny thing is the reactions are as if it just happened. So you hear the gunshot, right. You see 2 or 3 actions, and then you see, you know, 10 more as if it just happened. But it didn't just happen. It happened, you know, 10 seconds ago.
Yeah, a lot of elliptical kind of experimental kind of things that were happening in the 70s.
Well, there's a scene like that in Star Wars, I think, where Han Solo busts in a Darth Vader at a meal, and it cuts to Han Solo like 3 times as that door slides open from different angles. It keeps showing you that. I always thought that was a weird choice.
Yeah. Again, nothing debilitating. It's just, that's just an interesting, when, you know, you're right, 2 or 3 shots could have done it, but it's like, I don't know. Yeah, that was, I agree. That was kind of a little bit
overkill.
Odd, but nothing that, you know, it's not over the entire movie. It's just, when
it doesn't ruin the movie. It's just interesting that you notice it.
Right. So, Tom, was there any like closing thoughts you had on Dog Day? I think we've covered it pretty well, and it's something that, you know, we could go over it beat by beat, but it's like, you know, it's just an experience. You have to watch this for yourself, that kind of thing. And it's just parsing those special moments out. I mean, what final thoughts would you have kind of to wrap up on the movie?
Yeah, it's just such a good movie. It's just like, you know, like, and it's the kind of movie we really don't seem to get anymore. I think if we got this movie today, it would either be, you know, it would be elevated to, you know, a $150 million movie, and there'd be car chases and gunfights and, you know, all sorts of, you know, they'd want to turn it into a poor man's Heat, right? or it would be like this art house movie, you know. You get so fewer of like well-funded movies for grown-ups these days, and that's a shame. And this is kind of I think in a lot of ways, the peak era for well-financed, well-made grown-up movies.
Yeah, definitely. And then mixed in with the popcorn stuff, just a great abundance of stuff.
Look, both are great. Like, I'm not here to take a dump on the popcorn movies. Those are great. I think, you know, the MCU movies, especially up through, you know, Avengers, you know, Infinity War. I think that is honestly a stunning cinematic achievement that will never be replicated. That they could make that many movies that tied in, but you could still watch them independently of each other and told a cohesive and good story. Like you, as much as Hollywood is trying to replicate it, I don't think they ever will. And I think it will be 20 years before people can really step back from that and recognize what a true achievement in filmmaking it is, because typically you get rewarded with accolades or you get rewarded with money. And since they got rewarded with money, you know, I mean, most of those movies get good reviews, but they don't necessarily sing their praises from a filmmaking standpoint. And I think that's not fair. And so it doesn't have to be either or. You're allowed to like both. I think it's good. I think the film snobs should make their peace with some of the popcorn movies that are really good. And I think the people that love nothing but the popcorn movies should veer off the ventured path.
Well, you're going to have problems with the popcorn stuff as much as you're going to have problems with the art house stuff. Like no movie, no genre is perfect, right? It's just because I pick on one genre doesn't necessarily mean that another genre isn't equally flawed. It's just
I don't know, the Pop-Tart genre is pretty good.
Yeah.
When you see how many people that are go into making a movie, it's amazing that we ever get any that are good, let alone great.
Absolutely. It's what did you say in one of your episodes? It's just as easy to make a bad movie as just make a good movie. Like you never know, right?
You don't like it's
yeah. So let me ask you just one final question for you, Tom, and something that Johnny and I have noticed this season. We didn't plan it this way. Like the 70s, it seems like we're hitting, because movies are ebbs and flows, right? Things come and go, things are popular or not popular. The 70s are kind of the same. It feels like what's happening today because there's different factors. Let's just say the superhero stuff or the IP stuff. People are tiring of those things. People are tiring of the prequels that just assume that you're going to like them because it has a name like Indiana Jones slapped on it. People are just kind of tired of that stuff. And it was the same thing in the 50s and 60s where, yeah, I get it, like Cleopatra 18, that kind of thing, or all these movies. And so audiences are kind of tired of it. And people are like, well, what's happening? How do we and it's the same thing like streaming versus going to theaters now. Same thing happened back in the 50s where everybody had a TV and they had to invent CinemaScope. They had to invent Super Technorama to get people to go out and experience movies again, right? So ebbs and flows. And the 70s, again, it hit at a certain spot where, now we're taking something, we're building on it, and like it's getting people enthused again. And then again, by the end of the 70s, it started to dip again. And then the 80s, it was all the, not the exasperation, it's all about the spectacle, right? So it's kind of movies, it's all about the big booming kind of stuff, and then people got tired of it. And then the 90s hit and it was like all the independent voices started coming out, and Kevin Smith and Quentin Tarantino, and people latched onto that. My question, I guess, Tom, is like, do you recognize those ebbs and flows? And do you think that stuff like you talked about adult movies, I've been watching like challengers hitting people, like Garland Civil War hitting people, which again you've covered for real spoilers, and those are starting to be the movie. And it's interesting seeing people go to see those and have those be the top. But like, do you recognize those ebbs and flows, and do you think we're kind of in the same, waiting for the next big thing to come along? What do you think about all that?
I think the theater going is definitely in flux right now, and they're not sure what makes sense. And I think you're probably going to get a lot of spectacle movies, because I think what they believe at the moment is that's what people will go to the movies for, right? Like because of streaming, like when TV hit, then the answer for cinema was, we'll make the screen wider, we'll throw more money at a movie and make the colors brighter and make the casts, it's a cast of thousands, and we'll make these big giant things that you just can't enjoy on a TV. And so now I think you're seeing the same thing, but they have to get even more spectacle, because our TVs are so much bigger and so much better than they were in the 50s and 60s, And I think in the 70s, what you saw is a reaction to spectacle, and you had these smaller, less expensive movies that really, really clicked with people. And the studio system was collapsing, and that's when you see the rise of the auteur, and that and they realize like, oh, we can make these movies and we can figure out a way to make money with them. And then they kind of pivoted back to spectacle when they got Jaws, right? They started like, well, we need more of those. And the problem is that going into COVID, that was kind of almost all Hollywood was doing, and now they don't know what to do. And a lot of those smaller movies, I think a lot of those smaller, more slice of life movies, those art house movies, those gritty dramas, they're TV shows now. In the 70s, I think Breaking Bad would have been a movie, and now, or maybe 2 or 3 movies, if although we weren't as sequel minded back then, right? But like that, like nowadays, you a lot of times I think people feel like, well, I want to see that really gritty, or intense drama, but like 2 hours of it is 2 episodes, right? Like you couldn't tell the Breaking Bad story in 2 episodes. You couldn't tell the Sopranos in 2 episodes. Right. And so I also think there's this weird dichotomy of like, they say they want it in their movies, but like we can get a type of TV show that, 20 years ago or 30 years ago was impossible to make. And so I think that's why a lot of it's TV now.
Yeah. And again, you can get that experience. Why get a rich experience on TV? Why would you go and want like an empty calorie experience on the big screen? That kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's complicated.
Very.
We're just in flux, and it's just we hope everything balances out. But again, it's fascinating watching these things play out and just repeat.
Glad it's not my money.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So again, that's Dog Day Afternoon. Again, a great experience, and just if people haven't seen it, like just sink in. It'll grab you, right? So I'm glad that we're able to talk about this. I'm glad that I was finally able to see it, and that it not just lived up to expectations, but like, wow, I'm kind of mad that I didn't watch this before. Like, so I could have had this in my life, decades ago instead of just now.
But you always want to find the next good movie you haven't seen, and so you got to do that. That's good too.
Yep, and I thank you for that, Tom. So again,
Yes,
we've been planning on chatting for a while, and again, this didn't disappoint. I've had a great time chatting with you again.
Likewise.
It's a first of many conversations that I hope to have with you. Look
for sure. This is fun.
So again, tell us how people can find you. How people, again, real spoilers, monsters, all of you. But how can we get a hold of you, and how can people find Real Spoilers and find more where your writing is? Let us know.
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Roger Kubert, or on Facebook at facebook.com/Tom O'Keefe. And you can find the show online at facebook.com/Real Spoilers, or on Twitter at Real Spoilers. That's 2 E's. And you can get the show wherever you get your podcasts.
All right. Awesome.
Nice.
Great. Again, Real Spoilers. What a show. It's great having Matt on there now. Again, you've all got these very distinct voices, very distinct personalities. And I love that you entertain each other, where even if you're disagreeing, still it's your opinion, right? And you're just getting it out there. And it's just, again, even though you've got 4 or 5 people on at a time, it's very an easy listen. And again, I've always appreciated Real Spoilers. You just keep getting better and better, or all the accolades I could give you. Keep going. It's like I told Kevin, I'm glad you hit 700. I hope you can hit 1400. I hope you can hit 2100. So just keep going with those conversations. We really appreciate you.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for having me on.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, so this is again another episode of 70s Palooza. I've been Darin Lundberg,
and I'm Johnny Craddock.
And your body is a temple of the Lord.
Attica.